and welcome back to our Mental Health Monday series. I am Melanie, and this morning we are going to be talking about boundaries. What are boundaries defined as? So boundaries are the limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships. So this is romantic relationships, friendships, relationships with coworkers, relationships with other family members. It's the limitations that we set for how we're going to interact with others when it comes to relationships. Now, a person with healthy boundaries can say no to others when they want to, but they are also comfortable opening themselves up to intimacy and close relationships. So it's about that balance of not completely closing yourself off, but not also opening yourself up to so much that you can get overloaded. So how do we learn to set them? The biggest word that you can add to your vocabulary to help establish boundaries is the word no. Sometimes we really struggle with that word, but you have to get comfortable using it because there's times where you're going to have a lot on your plate. Someone may ask you for something or something may happen and you just don't have the capacity. So really learning to say no and becoming comfortable with using that word is essential if you're going to develop strong, healthy boundaries. You also have to be self-aware of where your own comfort ends. So really kind of knowing when you're in certain situations, kind of your limit. So how long can I be in this situation before I start to feel a little bit uncomfortable and need to take a break? Looking at my calendar, how many days can I fill in and physically see are busy before I start to kind of feel uncomfortable? If you're looking at your calendar and you feel uncomfortable, overwhelmed, it's a sign that you probably need to establish some boundaries, start saying no to some things, and just kind of being really aware of how much you're taking on. You also have to remember with boundaries that you are not responsible for other people's emotional responses to the boundaries that you set. If you set a boundary and someone has a negative response to it, that does not mean that you remove the boundary. That means that you work through the emotions, but that you continue to set it because you've already identified that this is a need for you. And we don't change our boundaries just because of the emotional responses of others. What else can we do to set boundaries? So another really good way of physically setting boundaries is by setting them with your phone, because we are in a very technology-based era. So really being self-aware of how much time you're spending on your phone. If you're someone that has a job where you're available 24/7 and you don't have established work hours, boundaries are 10 times more important for you. Utilizing the do not disturb feature on your phone and setting a certain time frame every night that after this time you are unavailable, you are not of access to anybody. That is a very clear boundary that you can set. Having limitations. So if you're going to engage in certain things, saying, hey, this really takes, a lot of energy from me, so I'm going to be here for X amount of time and then I'm going to step away, because if I go outside of that boundary, it's really going to start to affect me. So I'll give what I can up until the point of discomfort. Prioritizing sleep is another huge one, especially here in the United States and our American culture. We have a very hustle, work. And so it's really important to prioritize your health through sleep. And so establishing a good, healthy time to go to bed and wake up every day is another huge boundary that you can set for your own health. What are some examples of boundaries that people really struggle with setting? So the number one boundary that I see people really struggle with is setting a boundary as far as how they're willing to be treated. So an example of this would be someone saying that they feel uncomfortable if someone in the room is yelling or screaming, whether it's directed at them or not, they've noticed that discomfort. And so in that setting, you could set a boundary, for example, by saying, my boundary is that I'm not going to be yelled at, or I'm not going to be in the room with someone who's yelling, so I'm going to physically remove myself. Whether or not you verbally say the words is up to you. There's verbal enforcement of boundaries, and then there's the physical enforcement of boundaries, which would be the act of walking away. But it again very clearly lays out the line for how you're willing to be treated and what it is that you're willing to put up with and expose yourself to. Another example would be looking at your calendar and seeing all the things that you have scheduled. If you look at the calendar and you start to notice that discomfort, that sense of being overwhelmed, that's an indicator that it's time to set a boundary. So any other further commitments, it is a no. And then we start to look at the things that we have committed to, and we try to reassess if there's anywhere else that we can do outreach and start to pull back a little bit. The biggest indicator that you need to set a boundary is your own internal monologue telling you, hey, you feel uncomfortable, you feel overwhelmed. That is a huge sign that you need to set boundaries. And again, boundaries get set within ourselves. They also get set within relationships. So it's really important, again, to recognize your own comfort levels and how much it is that you can take on and what type of atmosphere environment you can be in and how much you can feel comfortable around others when they are behaving a certain way. So again, boundaries are really, really difficult for some people to establish, but I do promise that if you learn to say no and you learn to set them, you will begin to feel immediate relief in your life. So definitely start today by learning to say no to something and being okay with that. I will see you next week for our next Mental Health Monday video. Have a good day.